Hello, this is Jason Mundragon, where I am taking on everything in the universe and making it comprehensible to the collective consciousness. I wanted to give a sneak peek where I will be going with my next series, which probably will not be ready to progress for weeks from now. In the meantime, I encourage anyone to view what I have placed out so far and feel free to interact with me. Building into giving to us realizations on our dual natures will be slow-paced for many. This series may bleed out as being very logical, and for all understanding it is. The dual nature of the omni-consciousness as the source of consciousness and the universal mind must be cognized fully to realize who we are as its reflection here in the universe. Truth to why we are so very unique. And so, let's get started. We have a complete history of being told that we cannot know the mind of God. Yet souls have unaccountably risen up throughout our societies and have been made immortalized because they did just this. We end up fabricating enriched stories to place them on high pedestals and run to them for answers of the deepest mysteries. These greater beings simply smile upon us in true understanding of our plight. For the path to gain what they have is really about accepting the simplicity of our situations. We doubt ourselves in so many ways, which in turn creates so many complexities and hurdles to achieve peace within and without. Just to be in the presence of these greater beings gives to us a semblance of what we once had as truth. Once they had moved on, the fragments of their understandings develop in so many ways that few later generations can follow the origination. If we could just find the truth that consciousness is the knowledge of all life, in all existence, we would no longer have these doubts. We would come to realize that we do not require to know the mind of God, but that we are all of God, as God. This comes pressingly hard to comprehend when in conflict with the physical universe, and thus given forms. When formulating universal understandings, I acknowledge that many teachings point us in the right direction. These understandings unfortunately may not be in consistency with our current state of conscious progression. As spiritual leaders have awakened throughout time, they generally speak to us in terms of our current evolutionary development. We as grasping spirits tend to hold on far too long to these teachings, unable to see them for a momentary step towards growth. Great examples of this would be Siddhartha Gautama and Jesus of Nazareth. They both spoke with the voice of consciousness, but what was being said to us many have missed. The Buddha spoke to us about pulling away from materialism. Our spiritual development required this at the time as philosophies and industrializations threatened to pull us away from our conscious evolution, thus away from our unity with one another. Later, the Christ spoke to us about moving forward. Our spiritual development was strong enough, and now able to take on a new form of understanding. Eternal life was now capable of comprehension within the pages of the New Testament and predated Gnostic texts. In both these cases it was the omni-consciousness speaking to us in a way that we could at the time understand. Though the omni-consciousness is primarily concerned with our spiritual development, there is in fact another evolution which has progressed before us. Consciousness would not have been able to manifest without the other's evolution laying the groundwork for Earth's evolution to take place. Whereas Earth's evolution is the building stone for spirit to manifest consciousness, water's evolution is for form to manifest mind. These two will evolve quite differently due to the faculties they possess. Both possessing consciousness within degrees, in consideration to their connection and strength to source. Both very much still existing here today on Earth. Understanding water's evolution will be the bridge way we most lack in our spiritual development. Though water's evolution has already taken form far beyond the time of the Lemurians, it would not have been possible without consciousness. Those greater beings of water's evolution have visited Earth on many occasions and have also been immortalized in our eyes. They taught in a way that would be foreign to our earthen development because these teachings weren't meant for us as consciously collective beings. They were for water's evolutionary completion, meaning their final stage of development. I will need to lay down a structure of understanding for this to be fully comprehended by us. In my first book, Consciousness, Earth's Evolution Spiritually Realized, on a few occasions it may have come off that I was against the technological evolution, but this would be far from the truth. Consciousness is what we are. To be fully realized spiritually is to pass through these doorways of understandings and truth. And so, the first book dealt with just repairing the collective consciousness. This can only be done by conscious spiritual beings. In my second book, Mindfulness, Water's Evolution understanding form will take on an evolution before conscious development. A time period where intelligence ruled within the plane of mind. We will learn of the origins of the universal mind and how it differentiates from the source of consciousness. How those of water's evolution fought cosmic battles throughout their survival to be granted consciousness. I will speak of the different ways in which the plane of dark's influence within water's evolution formed, and how these past events still have influence on us today. I will bring new insight of the perfected being known as Jesus of Nazareth, his connection to what we call the planetary logos and his influences in today's world. I will break down evolution in its basic, yet powerful scientific realities and how they have made life develop with a design plan in mind. There will be further understanding of reincarnation, and I will properly define both intelligence and consciousness, too misperceived for far too long. Too many words such as awakened, self-consciousness, and awareness have been moved about without a proper understanding. It should come to full realization that this is due to the dual conceptualization of the earth and water evolutions that have resided within our development. This series will be dedicated again to evolving our universal understandings and taking all that we have been taught into a solitary reality of what is. Here you will find the Emerald Tablets, Hermetic philosophy, and esoteric origins of the alchemist. Hermes Trismegistus and his sacred path and influence with the books of the dead from Tibetan to Egyptian. The bulk of this book will focus on Advaita Vedanta, Yugas, and the main three branches of Buddhism as I bring new insights into the Buddha's awakening. Intelligence is a complex and structured event within the known universe, unlike the less convoluted progression of consciousness. In the end you will come through with an understanding that has been well needed for some time within our current Earth's evolution. For our dualities are multifaceted and our progression rapid within this last century. Universal understanding has become essential. There will be little need for self-improvement such as with the first book, for water's evolution has already completed itself. We just need to come to full consciousness of it and apply these understandings to further ourselves as one. There may be blocks within us that may not wish to look at what is given, and so I tread lightly on opening up the understandings within. I apologize for those that are fully ready to receive. There will be a conscious understanding of star beings and their place within our universal family. Many of these unknown greater beings that have visited throughout our understanding from Zecharia Sitchin's work to Erich von Däniken have a place in our universal understandings. It may be surprising to know that they are more akin to us than we have consciously realized. Humanoid in appearance because we share the fundamentals of existence, regardless of the millions of years of development. Though through evolution some have gained such consciousness, we must understand that not all beings that have matured will have just realizations. For like us, they too can succumb to the corruption of the outer universe. Some have come back and only view us as children, not fully able to recognize our connection to them. Whereas the greater among the star beings, have shed physical form and haven't fully been able to communicate to us until we evolve to our spiritual capabilities. Understanding their plight will give to us a better realization of these connections. I will speak of the times when the source of consciousness influenced the Buddha's path towards liberation. What was to be learned and how we fragmented the understandings due to our conscious levels moving forward. There is much this book will detail to prepare for the last in this trilogy, and finally reveal the realm in which consciousness originates. This is a journey for all of us as my consciousness is moved to formulate a comprehensible universal understanding. What is known, and how it can be communicated is still the goal. Much of this podcast's second series will feel both familiar and foreign at once. Water's evolution is deep within the past of this planet's history. Earth has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that our records only have current accounts to the last burst of evolution. Yet water's evolution remembers well the struggles during this time to aggressively survive before glaciation periods obliterated them over and again. Do not for 1 second believe that civilizations have formed a mere 10,000 years ago. It is intellect that seeks to know with proof, but consciousness knows truth. I will give an account of these ordeals. I will introduce us to the plane of psyche and how this plane hailed forth intellect within the universe. Creating beings of knowledge and growth, that learn through experience and research. Forming the very logical side of our societies and constantly at odds with the canopy of faith-goers throughout our history. Understanding the roots, influences, and impulses of this continued battle will help to give us reason and clarity. In the end you will come through with a realization few can fathom as you will be able to pierce the veil of duality and apply this to a complete evolutionary track. Coalescing with the passage of what we consider unaccountable timespans will be the formation of the plane of mind. What the complications were, and how these forces influence our now plane of spirit as it is attempting to manifest. How the plane of dark seeks to refabricate what it has already done to those within the star being societies to us now. What we can do to counteract this and even assist with repairing their cultures in the future. Again, I give to you a universal understanding which will place the responsibility within each of our hands for collective use. It is for us to collectively decide to move together in unison to be a better, more knowledgeable, and loving society. It is for us to fully realize form. Intelligence and consciousness. Consciousness is given very distinct traits within the overall scheme of the known universe. The logical mind will for the most part seek to deny this, for to do so would be to acknowledge its false sense of superiority it has fought so hard to maintain. Consciousness is active in manifesting its physical design by the purest of will alone, whereas intelligence must do so through manipulation of matter. When evolving, both completely capable of performing these tasks within their own way. Consciousness can evolve with much more expediency and without the hindrance of forming its needs, but to simply manifest its growth. We see this every day in the way the people we know transform their physical forms completely by their consciousness alone. Especially during times when they become ill and are faced with the reality that their lifestyles are causing their conditions. Some will transform to live, others will decide not to and move on. This is of course in considering that they have such choices and that their conditions are curable through their belief and will. These are situations where it takes only consciousness to transform. 1 week of conscious effort can astound those around us. Intelligence can do such transformations through long-term activities. Bodybuilders are one example. Strict adherence over elongated time spans will produce an outward appearance of a perfected physique. These pathways will generally take incredible tolls on the physical form as they must maintain an overall structure to their lives. Pushing the bar far beyond its means and discipline, specifically in areas of the body that is incapable of functioning beyond its condition. These are generally the competitive sports throughout the world. For they compete to entertain, and they enhance themselves through knowledge of manipulating the physical form. These two forms of evolution are conjoined with many of the Eastern martial arts and some of the yogic practices. A time when consciousness and mind work towards balancing the physical form. The choice would always be to decide which pathway to continue on when reaching a pinnacle point of their development. Evolution, consciousness, and intelligence has always had an undefined coexistence. True consciousness is undiscovered by most of the world. They are thus far content to use titles such as self-consciousness or awareness. The field that seems to be most intrigued about it at this time is quantum physics, for they have branched off onto a field of discovery that has given them systematic puzzles to ponder, which may later allot for insights that the rest of the logical world would consider or even accept. They have already found what many spiritual beings have said for thousands of years, that consciousness creates matter. This realization is tough to accept for the physical world. Nothing so far in life is considered to be so simple. For surely if a greater being created something from nothing out of thin air, it would literally be blocked by minds to accept this. It is very easy to say one believes, but much harder to accept this as true. The omni-consciousness granted those of water's evolution this gift at key stages within the Earth's development. Each time coinciding with the formation of organisms within Earth's history that would be able to propel life forward. These are what we call conscious impulse. During this time life was granted temporary conscious powers to survive, but few beings to take on true consciousness. With consciousness granted at these key moments, the life that existed was able to transform rapidly to survive further onslaughts of cosmic nature. However, these life forms did not have much of a lifespan and would soon to die out, leaving the universal mind to continue superficially structuring their evolution. Consciousness in water's evolution is directly related to the 7 prime chakra points. It is here that they were able to find their way to spiritual freedom millenniums back. Consciousness in the end being possessed and not inherited, so that those unwilling to do the work would not be given this sacred gift. The very difference to Earth's evolution is that we derive from the source of consciousness and are born into existence as conscious beings. Water's evolution is derived from universal mind and must work towards consciousness. Though tricky to fully comprehend, do not believe that each element is unto themselves but is just represented on this chart for a better understanding. Note that water's evolution hails from the source of mind, whereas Earth's evolution the source of consciousness. Though later they both will meet within the higher kingdoms. Earth will eventually become the plane of spirit, and water already achieving the plane of mind manifested. It is because of this that water's evolution does not arrive at consciousness until later within their evolutionary scheme. Within our known universe, consciousness is developed in a chart I presented in earlier episodes, but we'll go over once more for clarity. The first path will show water's evolution to consciousness. Once the groundwork is laid, the second path is then able to manifest and bypass the first, which is us and the Earth's evolution. The third path reserved for all that have achieved liberation from forms. What are these differences of consciousness within both evolutions? There isn't any. Consciousness is one and cannot be divided. Our individual movement on this cycling is dependent upon our realization of forms, mind, and spirit alone. Water's evolution had many complexities due to being associated with the mind and psyche plane, in addition being corrupted as we are now with the dark plane's influence. We will see very complex theories developing, shaded with deep philosophical insights during these times. Those sages and rishis capable of transmigrating to greater being status, found it easier to leave the physical world to their own means and find solemn and refuge far and away. We see these writings in the earliest forms of Vedanta, yet even these teachings were formulated at a much earlier stage in Earth's development. We see continued advancements from early Hermetics into Gnostic philosophy, and occult understandings branching into astrology and alchemist theories. In truth, water's evolution reached its pinnacle in what we call heart consciousness. All later realizations were the search to develop into higher forms of awareness. Heart consciousness manifested with the final development of the heart chakra. Those beings capable of seeing beyond this were what was expressed in later teachings. It's important to note that the heart chakra brought with it the compassion humans needed to grow in a more unified way, so this could be seen far before we could intelligently verbalize it. Lemurians and Atlanteans both possessed heart consciousness, for we see this in their societies. It wouldn't be until later that Eastern societies would lay out an understanding that could be shared for all to realize. Although earlier ages of the Polarian and Hyperborean were of Earth's evolution, they were still much too engrossed in consciousness from their initial developmental stages. They came onto Earth with a complete sense of oneness and only lost this through the fall of later stages. They later had to relearn heart consciousness from water's evolutionary track. Dr. Circus greatly attempted this connection by intelligence, stating the rainbow body is in reality the perceptual clothing our souls or beings wear while inhabiting this planet called Earth. This map of human consciousness on multiple levels of intelligence was clearly defined through a colored structure. Color psychology is about how our personalities are structured and formed around our conscious or unconscious absorption of light. Our vehicles of light or light body are absorbing the cosmic light through the prism of the chakra system. We absorb, mix, and eventually re-radiate out this light. This process that is going on deep within us and makes us very much who and what we are. This literature is brought forward because I wanted us to see how still today the mind continues to search even though most knowledge has been made aware of. It's important to note that the colors coincide with the etheric body and chakra points. There was a very strong effort to connect the two through intellect alone. In doing so, attempting to define consciousness in new light. Yet in reality this could best be defined as self-consciousness rather than consciousness. There has been an ongoing theme within water's evolution, to understand that which is considered unconscious. Believing oneself conscious, unconscious becomes that which is hidden. This is at odds with a true conscious being, for consciousness is to know all that is, unconscious is simply to no longer be conscious. Here you will find distinct differences within the two evolutions, and the confusions which occurred once conscious beings manifested in the physical plane. The plane of mind was forming with the influence of the plane of psyche, and so there was a continued aggressive growth to know, to understand, which still can be impressive today. It is the act of not accepting what is that causes water beings to dwell in areas that conscious beings would never tread. Where earth beings were primarily of Lemuria, water beings were in power in Atlantis. Their interest in technology and the most ancient dark arts kept them in a continued spiral of wanting to know more, which dark beings loved to entice them and place them further at loss. Later, when the survivors of Atlantis sought to reform their societies, star beings heard this call and assisted briefly. Star beings are of water's evolution as well, and so much that was taught was for their understandings and gave no weight to the earth evolutionary beings. These technologically advanced beings were incapable of seeing right in front of them that water's evolution was now merged with Earth's evolution. That both evolutions now coincided within the same form as human. These star beings would place a structure of understanding in place that would be designed to hinder our spiritual growth while strengthening their societies in incredible ways. They did not knowingly do this, for they had very little knowledge of spirituality, allowing them to dominate the globe in some ways still today. Just one in the many obstacles we as conscious beings have. Earth's evolution comes as an advancement of the developing higher chakra points. Imagine all that is of the body, centered on the heart and below as belonging to water's evolution. Yet all that is above the heart, is ruled by Earth's evolution. Evolution and creation. The age-old controversy of creationism versus evolution is well known. I doubt to shed any new light on this topic, for all have made their stand quite firmly. I only wish to bring this forth in universal understanding as it was meant to be. For as consciousness arises, so does truth, and through duality all things have a place. In considering, we have come to know factually that evolution occurs in three distinct ways on Earth, meaning within water's evolution. 1. Stem evolution, due to radiation from erupting magma from the Earth's core. This breaks up the continents, causing species to individualize and evolve separately. 2. Crown evolution, when continents reform again and crossbreeding of DNA occurs, creating new species from those that have evolved in two separate environments. 3. Mass extinction evolution, catastrophic events that cause species left to evolve to fit and survive the surrounding environment. These are the three ways in which planetary species evolved. They have very little in common with spiritual evolution, other than key moments when consciousness entered into the cycle. I am not partial to timeframes but must set up some references here as lifeforms evolved. 1. 4 billion years, fatty acids evolved to amino acids. 2. Amino acids evolved into proto-RNA, life-encoding molecules. 3. Proto-RNA evolved into ribozymes that could replicate themselves, which formed primitive cellular enclosed within a lipid membrane. 4. Proto-life forms became more complex, evolving by the solar energy. 5. RNA evolved into DNA, being able to now pass on information throughout generations, becoming bacteria's ancestors. 6. 2.9 billion years, oxygen-forming bacteria evolved to cleanse the carbonation from waters and air. 7. 2.4 billion years, a snowball effect which is known as an ice extinction occurred. Water's evolution, conscious impulse, thrived under the ice sheets into more complex life, living within cells together. This was the birth of mitochondria, allowing for more energy from oxygen and forming a structure to protect DNA. Mitochondria existed within colonies of thousands to a single cell. DNA strands begin to grow significantly, being able to take on even more information to share with future generations. 8. 1.8 billion years, supercontinent Nuna formed, was broken up, then supercontinent Radina formed, then broken up. 9. 700 million years, for over 100 million years ice ages continuously made life hard to survive. This caused genetic mutations to accelerate at faster rates in between the destructive periods. 10. 580 million years, beginning of another glacial age, the evolution of multicellular life forms, water's evolution, conscious impulse, was now able to utilize the nutrients within the atmosphere to adapt to the environment. Water life forms began to change very rapidly now. 11. 260 million years, glacial extinction caused by a collision with a dark nebula, corrupted force, and our solar system. This key moment took water's evolved DNA and transplanted it across the closer regions of our Milky Way. Randomly placing this same DNA from water's evolution on other solar bodies, some prospering into evolved societies far before Earth's advancement. Giving to us within our regions the various star beings. There are other star beings deriving outside of this, but that is for further communication elsewhere. 12. 260 million years, supercontinent Pangaea forms, water evolution, conscious impulse, forms the mammal strand. Larger brain sizes form in 3 distinct time periods, all coinciding with major volcanic eruptions on the planet. This places these events as stem evolutions initially due to the scattering of species, but the radiation played a more undercurrent event. These events occurred at 2.3, 1.9, and 0.3 million years ago. Now I will speak of things never before communicated. Theosophy and anthropology may find common grounds at disputing what will follow, but I am not writing to calm the few. The true and only reason consciousness took root here on this planet was due to this very event. Roughly 2 billion years ago, a very special asteroid made impact with Earth. It hosted our most reverend logo, the absolute of consciousness within all that is of Earth. Our logo moved deep into the Earth's center and took on a deep sleep to begin reforming the planet for the future events. This perfected being chose to host this planet and assisted in budding consciousness. In a sense, we can say this was the very moment Earth's evolution began to manifest, although conscious beings did not surface until much later. This logo will come to have many faces and names throughout the many eons as newly awakened beings reinvent their understanding of the logo's nature. Named Yahweh in Earth's cycles know that this perfected being is not omniconscious. It stands at a precipice of achieving much after Earth's completion, but had come onto Earth much more knowing than any born of Earth. I will give more insight later, but will say that this being first hailed from the plane of holy, then embraced within the higher hierarchies. From there it incarnated into the plane of psyche to stay there until fully developed. Then later given the opportunity to create new consciousness on Earth. Consciousness and Earth's evolution will begin to take on the forms known to us as the root races. Among the Polarian and Hyperborean, the forms were very much etheric. The later part of the Hyperborean age, the forms began to take on a light solid form as they moved their way through the Earth's crust and into the oceans. Within the oceans is where the blending of the two evolutions took place, water's evolution already aggressive in nature and Earth's evolution still childlike and detached. With the merging and now connected with conscious beings, DNA could now communicate to all instead of just those it was in contact with. This brought forth the third root race in the Lemurian, and a crossbreed of many species. This race was giant in form, had various colors and designs, a cycloptic eye that eventually became a third eye, various numbers of arms, and the beginning portions of them laid eggs. Yet through all this the conscious side manifested themselves through the understanding of intelligent impulse. Earth's evolution manifested without concern as water's evolution focused on perfecting itself to dominate survival. Both evolutions cohabiting in the same form yet having little knowledge of this and living completely different experiences. The fourth root race was much more dominated by water's evolution. With Earth's evolution going into a slumber, we notice the lack of manifesting conscious activity now. Forms no longer had multifaceted varieties, they downsized from 60 to around 8 feet, and would resemble the humans of today. This caused water's evolution to go into a frenzy as they felt they were devolving from their once grandeur among the life chain. We understand that water's evolution, though highly intelligent, they are not conscious. They never knew of our presence within their evolution. On occasion the logos would impulse and beings would awaken to compassion, but it would be overruled in societies of the Atlantean age. Consciousness knows consciousness, intelligence does not. This is important to note, for even today true consciousness can be seen as a threat to the intellect. We must understand that water's evolution feels that it will die off if it allows Earth's evolution to succeed it, which of course is untrue. Many etheric events were taking place at once on levels that water's evolution had no understanding of, and so therefore could not defend against. Consciousness formed with what we call the Christ's impulse, deception formed with what we call the Luciferic impulse, and entities from the dark plane incarnated on Earth and began to corrupt both evolutionary lines. Water's evolution only saw these beings as a discovery and a means to achieve greatness, as Earth's evolution continued to slumber within the same forms. Of the event that caused the Luciferic impulse I will speak just once in this book. The plane of Holy and a portion of the Council of Dragon, generally neutral, was at war due to events later spoken of. Lucifer, being defeated, was not sentenced to Earth, but upon his defeat fled as victors and incarnated in Earth. This bonded his consciousness with that of Earth's evolution until the time at which we achieve spiritual freedom. This will be fully detailed in later episodes to come. You may now see why water's evolution has always been overly intrigued with learning. To go so far on so many occasions to experiment and tinker with understandings many a conscious soul would never, much like the atom bomb. Water's evolution is not satisfied with what is, it must continue to improve itself, even at the detriment of lives lost. They exist with an understanding that life and death is a means for future survival to strengthen. We see this today with the herd immunity followers during this pandemic. To literally accept millions of deaths to achieve this is unconscionable to the awakened soul. But this goes even further when we look at any new experimental drugs that are pushed forward with the acceptance of lives lost before it is tweaked to perfection. I hope I've given us all some insights into this. Eventually the Atlanteans would dwell so deep in destructive arts that they would bring themselves to ruin. A group of black magi and white magi went to war over the dark summoning practices and destructive arts. In the end, those among the white magi capable of leaving the planet fled to the stars, becoming the star beings that possessed consciousness and later evolving light bodies. Presumed to have left Earth because they would have been hunted to extinction due to the pacts that were made with dark beings and the black magi. These black magi would begin to restructure future societies to their will. Hundreds of thousands of years would pass at the hands of these superimposed leaders in our civilizations. The black magi were intent upon eternal rulership, unknown to the deceit and corruption spoken of in the first book. They eventually would fall due to their greed by believing in the dark beings and raising them to godhood status. It was around this period that Lucifer began his uprising and structured religions began to aggressively form. The entities from Dark's plane formed an alliance with Lucifer temporarily to commit to the destruction and keeping consciousness from ever awakening in humans. These same dark beings eventually decided to let go of their servants the black magi, for once the corruption had taken root, they had no need for them anymore. In desperation, these black magi sought through dimensional magic and summoning to find reasons why their gods had left them. In doing so, they connected to the star beings of water's evolutions past. These star beings derived from mind and had no knowledge of consciousness. These star beings would dominate civilizations for thousands of years, causing all other greater beings to take a back seat. The black magi faded out of history for a time and were forgotten. It would not be until the Golden Age of Egypt that these black magi would wrestle power back into their courts with the formation of the most sacred studies of Egypt. These were controlled only by the priest class and paved the path for continued sacred orders for centuries to come. The star beings would move on, but not without placing overseers in place. Unknown to them, they were secretly controlled by the black magi. Hermetic philosophy actually became Gnostic through the return of the white magi. They had grown strong enough and a portion shed their forms, seeking to now free others within water's evolution. They sat on the backseat but very much influenced conscious evolution. We would now call these beings the Pleiadians. These formerly known white magi now aligned with the collective consciousness, and the souls from the plane of Holy were incentivized to free others within the corruption's grasp. This began a long and perilous campaign throughout this portion of the world. Those of Earth's evolution developed throughout the Western Americas, the South Americas, and early Canadian front. This includes the Hawaiian areas. Many beliefs were formed that connected consciousness with all creatures and life. Among the other cultures that formed from the scattered Lemurian continent was the early people of Australia and the sacred sages of Asia. The souls of early Asia were blessed with little interference from water's evolution and able to dwell deeper into their psyche origins. Hence laying incredible accounts for spiritual transmigration and detailed definitions of occurrences of greater beings. As all beings of evolution, they sought to nail down the formations of the heavenly bodies and personify the universe. Much of what was learned by them were from greater beings of water's evolution, imparting wisdom from a very conscious viewpoint. The early Vedic structure was known from water's viewpoint as greater beings continued to reincarnate to continue their work on earth. On occasions, water beings would succeed others and be given access to consciousness beyond thought. They would attempt to give new consciousness to older belief structures and would fail on many instances, until growing enough to impart consciousness without words. For as was stated, consciousness knows consciousness, intelligence does not. Beings from water's evolution will always reach a point of no further knowledge from their studies. Then over time they will manipulate matter to fit a new discovery and believe themselves to find a new breakthrough, not consciously aware that they created it. This will bring us to what we conceive to be 10,000 years ago. Many gods would be personified for the next 4,000 years. Some greater beings from the plane of holy, some from the plane of dark, some from star beings, and even some that were primordial elementals that we empowered. The true powers left us to our delusions, for it kept us from realizing truth. Wars raged always through opposing belief structures, although we have been led to believe it was through the need to expand land. When consciousness was beginning to peak and collective compassion would flower, many powers would align to stop this from occurring. Such destruction that knowledge would be lost unless deeply hidden, cultures attempted to be obliterated unless too sturdy that they could not be, and souls that were reincarnated with the pure purpose of freeing others would be quickly silenced. Eventually, the omni-conscious would begin to become compassionate to this plight. As I spoke of in the first book, conscious beings at the greatest part of their development touch source. During this time conscious pulses give new experiences to the omni-conscious. This had happened enough to where the omni-conscious was stimulated to act against the imbalance within this region. This would empower the collective conscious beings. They would reincarnate with renewed strengths and gifts, now capable of cleansing the corruption. Now I will speak of branches in the universe via the planes and their formations and how this developed within water's evolution. But first I feel we need a complete realized understanding of the universal mind. The universal mind. With renewed strength we now see conscious leaders taking on more roles as the forces of religion became the new warfront. With logic falling into disarray, the plane of psyche, already formed earlier, would start to influence water's evolution as the awakening of mind began to form. Understanding the universal mind is to understand all that functions without thought, much like the complete body organism. Universal mind works above mind, yet mind is unique because it thinks and actively manipulates its environment. However, at any time should mind stop this action, the universal mind will once again take over. The creation of a form is in a fetus, the universal mind is at work. Once a human being deceases, again the universal mind takes over. The universal mind is what connects all minds, what's learned by those minds, and how it can apply this to future generations of minds. Minds can only evolve through adding to their knowledge. This knowledge does not register as what is right or wrong, only what works. And so, minds will continue to do these actions, unless something new has proven to work in conjunction with survival. As these minds evolved into sentient beings, they began to form pathways of knowledge that had nothing to do with survival. They began to seek knowledge of the existence in which they lived. They wished to learn the reason behind form and the understandings of the cosmos. These things had little to do with the basic thinking minds, and so these visionaries could find themselves shunned, killed, or kept captive as interesting people to possess. What began this need to understand and caused minds to wander beyond its function was the influence from the plane of psyche. But still, with sentient beings came free movement of forms. Now capable of physically reflecting what universal mind does, manipulate and transform form for future evolution. Water's evolution was not initially these evolved forms of minds, for the universal mind controlled much of their evolution. Still today we see life forms function with intelligence that simply cannot be understood, and so we only fascinate with them. How the structures of the insect kingdoms blow us away with new discoveries continually. The universal mind works on the premise of what has worked before. It will continue to replicate this on the most fundamentals for prosperity. The God particle and golden spiral will prove this exceptional function. Remember this spiral of how consciousness is formed? Spirit moves into form, moves into mind, and then moves into consciousness. This means that these initial forms of water's evolution are in fact of Source's energy, and children of consciousness. All that light touches is of consciousness, though not necessarily conscious. As they evolved past mind, they became free agents as consciousness began to take root in their collective understandings. This would ultimately cause minds to move beyond the universal mind to seek understanding of it. Many sentient beings that only move through developing the lower chakras, would learn enough to conceive the universal mind as the origin of existence and would cease to look further. We see this today within our theosophical views, though incredibly versed with great spiritual breakthroughs, many have taken it in and ceased to continue once the masters of old moved on. The universal mind has been and will always be throughout all of existence. It has been perfecting the principles of creating form since before matter was. Over billions of years through trial and error, it now replicates what it knows works. We will see this work in all the fundamental natures of life. The universal mind's goal is sentient creation. We will see this currently in the known universe. All other animal kingdoms are in fact catered to assist, when not they will cease. All breaking and reforming of molecules throughout the billions of years were in fact looking, experimenting, and tweaking sentient creation. There were trillions of failed experiments until what was found worked. Even today we learn of many extinctions before humans. Sentient beings, as an unperfected but finalized creation of the universal mind, was expected to succeed, and seed the universe. It never accounted for sentience developing as it is beyond this. Within this structure of water's evolution, you will find in order the universal mind, form, intelligence, and then individualized mind. Individualized minds being on the precipice of collective consciousness should they move beyond heart consciousness. Universal mind is aware of consciousness within the known universe, however it is looked at as an abnormality due to its unpredictability. Universal mind is about structure and function, no matter the forms it creates. Universal mind touches the unconscious, it formed the elemental planes and entities which reside there and is not of the outer universe. The universal mind is a companion to consciousness, though lacks true understanding of it because it is not among what it controls. The plane of psyche was formed from the record-keeping of the universal mind. It holds what we would call the Akashic records. This plane is governed by greater beings that help to formulate the greater Medic principles. These principles later brought to us by Hermes during the time of water's evolution here on Earth once he was advanced enough to fully realize them. Though not initially what they are called, it would be better if I kept our titles. As stated, the universal mind is not concerned with what is good or bad, simply what functions and advances. The beings of the plane of psyche are incredibly intellectual, factual, and decisive on many of the universal events. They have become a council believing themselves the overseers just as the universal mind conceived. But will only on the rarest of occasions commune with beings of a lesser status. They pass about through the physical/etheric planes only to keep updated records of the current status of the physical universe. They move throughout all planes this way, even the plane of dark. For the plane of dark was initially created by the universal mind, but then taken over by the outer universe. This hostile event will be spoken of in the final book. Remember when I spoke how perfected beings reincarnate into planes and stayed within the cycles until collective freedom was reached? The perfected being we know as Yahweh was first of the plane of holy. He later achieved status within the higher hierarchies within the plane of light, then through consciousness known only to him and the omniconscious reincarnated within the plane of psyche. He stayed there establishing rulership, conscious among the many highly intelligent, staying until far after the plane of mind was formed. He learned things of form and structure many a conscious being doesn't ponder. He later moved from psyche to inhabit the earth, seeding Earth's evolution, and our bestowed consciousness is granted through his sacrifice here. Though his is a story well known to the conscious collective, its place is better suited for a later time as well. Now that we understand some of the connections to the universal mind, we can go further. Universal mind is the Godhead to many star beings' understandings. I will later categorize them in their various structured forms. Some possess no consciousness that we can perceive but are in fact still of consciousness. These are among those that have presented themselves as friendly to our knowledge. Others that have become too manufactured, too robotic-like, and have succumbed completely to the infection and corruption of the dark plane. Remember that the outer universe takes what is, manufactures replications to spread itself into the collective universe. In the plane of mind, this takes the form of AI, artificial intelligence. This without doubt would be the working insinuation of the outer universe to replicate what has already greatly harmed mind's plane, which connects to spirit's plane via Earth's evolution. The plane of spirit now manifesting while an influence of the plane of mind seen in the graph. This means that the midpoint of spirit's development will directly touch with the midpoint of mind's. In addition, it will be on the side representing the dark plane's influence. The plane of spirit's evolution from Earth was already looked at, but the graph does show this connection as well. The area to most note would be the plane of entropy. Later I will explain the plane of mind's development through water's evolution. This will all become clearer at that point. Next, I will give a brief history of how Earth's evolution struggled to prosper and consciously grow in this intellectually harsh existence until now. My goal is to lead us into full realization at this point. Thank you for joining on a sneak peek of my next series. Hope you enjoyed it, and peaceful journeys. If you enjoyed my podcast, please consider helping my progress in any way. Please feel free to contact me, or subscribe, find me on my social networks, share, like, and of course any monetary assistance will be placed back into my work. I am a new author of just under a year and have really made my work completely within reach at just 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. The information is more important than anything, but everything helps in a collective way. Thank you again.